Hello everyone and welcome to today's D&D story. Now, I just recently finished GMing my first campaign, and overall it was really good. It had a really good group of players, a really good group of characters, and overall I feel like I really started developing my GMing style and are starting to learn the tricks of the trade. It was really good overall. However, that doesn't mean that this campaign didn't have its share of unexpected twists, which even I, the GM, was not prepared for at all. Now, for some background on the campaign, the players were trying to stop a group of dragons from catastrophically changing the past using an ancient artifact called the Tome of Prospects. At the beginning of the campaign, the party was simply doing jobs for their local adventuring guild and inadvertently foiling the schemes and plans of these dragons, but once they actually learned of the dragons' plans and started connecting the dots between all of the seemingly unconnected guild adventures which they were going on, they started journeying around the world trying to find out more about these dragons. They journeyed to two capitals of my world, the second of which is the capital of the desert northern nation, Kazan. The party journeyed through the religious catacombs of the capital of Kazan, where the Tome of Prospects was allegedly hidden, but they were just barely too late. The dragons had gotten the tome right before them. So they were forced to journey to the dragon's base of operations, where they were going to actually start this ritual to change the past. Now, the dragons were based in the dragonborn nation of Karevia. Now, Karevia is a very secretive nation. They're very opposed to letting any visitors into their borders, so the party had to rent a rowboat and illegally journey into Karevia. After a close encounter on the rocky coasts of Karevia, the party journeyed inland and quickly got lost in the rocky maze-like geography of this country. However, they met an underfunded scholar, which was willing to be their guide through this area. The party eventually found their way to a ruined city and traveled up a mountain pass, which supposedly led to where all of dragonkind eternally slumbered. At the end of this mountain pass, the party found a cave opening, and then they met the ancient red dragon which had been tailing them for the past few days. After a small chat, that dragon closed the cave opening, trapping them inside. Now, the PCs quickly found out that this was not just a cave. The dungeon which they were in appeared to be some sort of shrine, some sort of burial ground, for all of the warriors which had died in the tyranny of dragons. The age in my world where dragons had ruled the world for 50 years. And then after that period, the finite races, the playable D&D 5th edition races, had taken it back. They journeyed through this 3-layer dungeon, encountering a white dragon wormling, which they befriended earlier in the campaign and got really attached to, and are still really attached to. And I'm sure that nothing bad is going to happen to her in the next campaign. In the second layer of this dungeon, the players found a multitude of slumbering dragons which had been put into this eternal sleep by the Dragonborn peoples at the end of the tyranny of dragons. Of course, there were a few dragons faking that eternal slumber and suddenly woke up and fought the PCs, but they handled all of the combat encounters in this dungeon somewhat well. And then they moved down to the third and deepest layer of this dungeon. The walls, the floor, the ceiling were all made of the bones of the finite races. Dragonborn, orcish, half-orcish, human, gnomish, elven. All of the finite races' bones littered this last layer of this dungeon. They traveled through a few ominously lit rooms, which were completely empty except for a few pillars and some gargoyles. But then they came to a room with a large 40-foot tall, 30-foot wide steel door with two young red dragons guarding it. The rogue of the party dived off the balcony which they were looking down at the dragons from, and dealt over 50 damage to one of the dragons in a single attack. However, the second dragon turned to the rogue suddenly and said, "Bad move." From the bone walls emerged multiple ancient dragons, and the doors magically slammed shut behind the PCs. And from there, well, let me just say, all hell broke loose. It seemed as if all hope was lost. There was no way that 4 5th level PCs could face off against multiple ancient dragons, not even one ancient dragon. But then suddenly, through the opposite, smaller wooden doorway on the opposite end of the wall, came bursting in all of the guild members which they'd befriended in the beginning of the campaign. I described the brave and heroic actions of these guild members as the guild master ran up to the PCs, telling them that they had to stop the ritual before Katosh could finish it. Now, throughout this entire campaign, the players had caught glimpses of someone leading the dragons. A humanoid which was leading the dragons. Someone which wielded 2 scimitars, one in each hand. They hadn't really learned who this figure was. It was still a mystery. They'd only seen this figure in strange, shared dreams. But now, this figure's identity had been revealed. However, the guildmaster couldn't explain. They needed to stop the ritual as quickly as possible. The players rushed to the giant steel door, which was slowly closing shut, when 2 familiar silhouettes stepped out from behind the door as it closed shut behind them. Now, these 2 familiar figures were 2 villains from earlier in the campaign, which I brought back, which they hadn't actually defeated. One of them was a betrayer, which was the bard's sugar mommy? That's how she described it, but who's to know? Let me just say that this party's bard was very high in charisma. The second familiar villain was a blue half-dragon with a great axe and a lightning javelin, which they had faced and defeated earlier in the campaign, but he was back for revenge. The 2 NPCs gave their short spiels, especially the betrayer, and then they described that both of them had the 2 keys to the steel door to the ritual room, and they told the PCs that if they wanted the keys, they would have to catch them first. The 2 NPCs ran in opposite directions into 2 separate boss arenas. The players decided to split the party in half. The ranger and the sorcerer going to face the half-dragon, and the bard and the rogue going to face the betrayer. First, the ranger and the sorcerer found out that the half-dragon had recently adopted a pet basilisk, so they had to watch their gaze, or else they would be turned to stone. The sorcerer suddenly teleported in between the basilisk and the half-dragon and cast Thunderwave, knocking the basilisk into the abyss below. The half-dragon, angry that the sorcerer had killed his beloved pet, brought the sorcerer down to critical HP, so he retreated, the ranger covering him as he ran. Eventually, the ranger and the sorcerer were able to take down the blue half-dragon, and the first mini-boss was slain. In the other direction, the rogue and the bard were facing off against the betrayer. They found themselves in a strange, cross-shaped room. The room was furnished with velvet furniture, but the floor and the furniture were littered with knives of various sizes, lengths, and shapes. In the center of this cross, in a swirling pool of mist, the betrayer stood, with 4 strange objects orbiting around her. The bard and the betrayer talked for a short time, when finally the battle commenced. They found out that the knives throughout the room were animated, and they suddenly came to life, attacking the bard and the rogue. After fending the blades off for a few times, the betrayer started to approach the PCs. The bard used her rod of rulership to gain submission over the betrayer, and then ordered the betrayer to come in between the two PCs. The bard, taking a short sword, attempted to behead the betrayer, but she wasn't able to do enough damage. However, the rogue was able to behead the betrayer. And then the bard did some things which we will never speak of. Now that the two groups had gotten the two keys to the ritual room, they ran back to the enormous steel doors, inserted the keys, and opened the massive doors. As they slid open, they ran down a long corridor with light shining in from the other end. Were they too late? As they ran further, the corridor opened up into a massive circular room with 4 pillars in each corner. In the center was a massive altar, and standing next to this altar was a single figure, Ahara Katash, the first dragon slayer of this world. Now Katash did the classic arch-villain final boss monologue, explaining why a dragon slayer was leading a group of dragons. Katash's backstory is actually quite tragic. She made a vow that she would never go back to civilization again before she defeated Tiamat, the Queen of Dragons. She journeyed to Tiamat's lair and failed miserably, but barely survived and was able to nurse herself back to health. However, her vow still stood. She watched as different nations squabbled with each other and waged war on each other, and she was angry that the peoples of the Wraith Globe had not taken advantage of everything that she had fought for. When she had the epiphany, why not give the peoples of the world a second chance by reversing time back to the tyranny of dragons? From there she attained age immortality and eventually found the dragons and woke up a few of them. She convinced them that she was some sort of extremist, that she wanted to see the world burn, but she was playing them for fools. This monologue was actually quite long, and the sorcerer was not having it. He cast Unseen Servant to attempt to steal the tome out from under Katash's nose. Katash rolled miserably for a contested strength roll against the Unseen Servant, and the Unseen Servant was able to take the book from her hands. However, that also meant that the ritual was interrupted halfway through, which, you know, just casually just breaks time and space and logic, and yeah, just your normal Tuesday. The cavern started collapsing around them, parts of the room moving back in time to the beginning of the world, parts of the room becoming extra advanced, parts of the room reverting to their normal cavernous form, and it seemed like time was beginning to go insane, the room shaking wildly. The sorcerer was able to use Mage Hand to get the tome back to him. And that means that he's able to cast a wish. You know, 5th level PCs, 9th level super overpowered spell. What could go wrong? After a lot of bickering between the players, they finally decided that they were simply going to cast 8th level Disintegration Ray and kill the final boss in one hit. The Disintegration Ray dealt over 100 damage in a single shot, launching Katash back over 30 feet, but time and space had already broken irrevocably, so that was immediately undone. She just reverted back to how she was 2 seconds ago. Duplicates of the player characters started appearing next to them, random people started appearing in the room, parts of the room just ceased to exist suddenly, and then everything went black, and all of the players and Katash were all teleported to Limbo, the plane of chaos. From there, it seemed as if Katash had turned into some sort of hideous beast, hideous hybrid of her past self and what was supposedly the wicked intentions of her mind. Furthermore, she was also able to see the greatest desires, ambitions, failures, and ideals of the player characters. So she trapped each of them in their own specialized little illusion to trick their mind and make them suffer. And it seemed as if all hope was lost. However, the solution was to make amends with this possible future or this past. As one by one the players figured it out, the player characters made amends for the mistakes they had made, really causing a lot of character development, which I really like. The illusions which had previously been hurting the player characters suddenly faded away, replaced with a specialized weapon glowing with power, especially meant for each PC. However, the sorcerer didn't apologize. The player was actually quite good about this. I really appreciate that. They role-played the character rather than themselves, and the sorcerer accepted their fate. However, as the bard, the rogue, and the ranger's illusions shattered around them, Katosh looked over surprised that somehow the party had figured out how to use her illusions against her. The three of them charged up this grassy hill surrounded by the absolute chaos of limbo and simultaneously struck Katosh. And everything went black. The party opened their eyes, and they were back in the ritual room. Katosh was gone. No one was in the room with them. Suddenly, all of the guild members broke through the door, and the guildmaster ran over, asking them what had happened. Had they defeated Katosh? They weren't sure, but that's enough cause for celebration, the guildmaster said. They journeyed back to the nearest town, and there was much merrymaking and drinking that night among the guild. And that was the end of my first campaign. As I said, I think it went really well, but the crazy thing is that they they defeated the final boss of the campaign without making an attack roll once. They didn't make a single attack roll. It was all thematic. It was all very dramatic, thematic, very cinematic. And honestly, I really liked how it turned out. I was originally planning that they would listen to our monologue, and then they would fight for a short time, either until they just ripped the tome out of her hands and the ritual was interrupted, or when they dropped her down to 0 hit points, and then they would have been transported to limbo, and everything which had happened before would have happened the same. Which, just goes to show, for all of you GMs out there which may feel like, my players are so unpredictable, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to handle them. Just know that sometimes things can turn out even better if you just go with the flow.